Hey guys, in this video I'll be talking about how to improve your overhead press. I'll be talking about this from a strength perspective, so I mean an overhead press 1 rep max. Although hypertrophy will be a big part of our strategy to improve our overhead press, and of course it works the other way, where if you're stronger, then you can maybe come back to overhead pressing for hypertrophy training and get more out of it. So the overhead press is a lift that people tend to plateau on. It's real common that you'll hear people be like, oh, I can't get my overhead press up, like what's going on? Whereas those same people maybe will not run into that same problem on the bench for a while. So I think first of all, it's important, the main thing to notice, if this goes with any lift, is if you want your overhead press to grow, you have to prioritize it. You have to do it first, and you have to do it multiple times a week. You can't overhead press like third on your push day after benching and dumbbells and be like, oh, why won't it go up, This is how I used to be, in fact. I always used to wonder why my overhead press was so weak. And it's like, in hindsight, it's like, well, I was doing it, like third exercise in. The first thing is that you have to prioritize it. And the program I'm going to be presenting to you later on is all about prioritizing the overhead press. So what does that prioritization mean? It means, first of all, doing it first, like I said. It also means frequency. So I think 3 times a week is best. You can get away with more, but you can't get away with less, I don't think. Like, if you really want to say that you are putting your best foot forward for overhead pressing, you've got to do it 3 times a week. You can do 2 and you might make some gains, but if you want to tell yourself that you're doing the best you possibly could, 3 times a week is kind of a minimum. And then it's about volume and volume manipulation. So how many sets are we doing on each of those 3 days, or more if you want them, and what are we doing? I found the best way to break it down is a pause day, a volume day, and a heavy day. So let's kind of talk a bit more about that, because one of the other things that's really important with overhead pressing is stability. And that's where the pause comes in. So overhead press is a little bit different in that the top position of the overhead press is quite an unstable position if you're not used to it, and therefore your strength can be reduced on the overhead press. Same with bottom position, the whole overhead press, in fact, but the top especially. Your strength can be reduced if your stability is reduced. We've seen this in a bajillion studies and anecdote. If I see someone wobbling like a leaf on the overhead press, I know they're just not going to be as strong as they could be. So building a big overhead press is about building strength, of course, which we'll talk about, don't worry. Hypertrophy, of course, we'll talk about. We need big shoulders to overhead press, but also stability in that overhead press position to make sure that we can use the most of our strength. So that's the logic behind the pause day. The logic behind the volume day, especially when building up, you'll see that my program has multiple phases, as strength program probably should. The volume day is all about just getting bigger shoulders. We literally need our front delts to grow, because a larger muscle tends to be a stronger muscle, especially if we go for a specialization phase afterwards to turn that hypertrophy into useful strength. And then finally, we have a heavy day because strength is specific and is practicable. So we need to practice the skill of overhead pressing heavy things. So I think that's a really good way of breaking down your specific overhead press work is 3 days, pause, heavy, and then volume. So that's kind of a little bit about the frequency. What about intensity? So I reckon overhead press can be pushed to a slightly higher intensity than, take an example of a deadlift. Say you were doing a deadlift specialization program. You can't deadlift at an RPE 9 3 times a week. You'll just fall apart. You won't make any progress. But you probably can, especially if you get used to it, overhead press at a 9 3 times a week and make progress. I've done it. Doesn't mean that everything's going to be at a 9, but you can overhead press kind of in a 7. And I actually haven't included RPEs in my program because I want to leave it up to you to find where your recovery is. But I reckon overhead press, you can go from all the way from an 8 to a 10. You can overhead press at an RPE 10 multiple times a week and still make progress, which is crazy because if you tried that on a deadlift, you'd explode. But overhead press is a little bit less taxing, especially once you get very, very stable in that overhead press position. So that's kind of some of the basics in terms of what do we talk about. We talked about frequency, volume, intensity, kind of the very, very basics of all strength programming. And then we added the extra thing of stability for the overhead press. And you'll notice that a lot of my program is actually addressing that stability part. So let's jump into the program here. I've written it up, so I'll pull out the old trusty laptop. And note, this is just an example, especially if you are trying to include this in other training, hypertrophy training or strength training, because I've just written up what's important for the overhead press here. So if you want to synthesize this into your hypertrophy training or your strength training, then you'll probably want to figure out how that's going to work for you. Important thing to note is that the things that will take away from your overhead pressing in terms of other training are basically any other pressing. So especially as you get into the peaking phase and the strength phase, you might want to think about pulling those out. And then just as with all things, if you pull other stuff out, it'll create more recovery points. So if you stop, for example, in the peaking phase, I wouldn't recommend training legs or any heavier or anything because it will affect your overhead pressing. But yeah, so the overhead press, we know how we talked about stability. An interesting thing to note is that we really need and want strong rotator cuff muscles because they keep our shoulders strong and stable in place. And we want strong rear delts, side delts, and obviously, so front delt, the overhead press, if we break it down, What's actually moving you is the front delt and the tricep. Now you'll notice I haven't included any tricep isolation here, and that's just because I am not convinced that it actually translates to the overhead press that effectively. I think with all this overhead pressing work, you'll get pretty robust tricep hypertrophy, especially if you're doing this as part of a bigger program. So I didn't include any tricep isolation here. You can, especially if you find you get translation to it, but I find that no matter how strong I get a tricep isolation, it doesn't really help my overhead press. Overhead pressing helps my overhead press, or overhead variations. But you will see there's a ton of side delts, I think that helps the stability of a shoulder, and a ton of rear delts. And then I've actually gone ahead and included some other stability movements that you may view as goofy, but actually really help. So those are the javelin press, where you take a barbell and you press it up like this on like a neutral grip. You'll find that really builds stability through the rotator cuff. You'll feel those muscles working, but also through the scapula down here, and that can make your overhead press stronger. And I've also included a kettlebell overhead press, which you're going to perform with the kettlebell, like holding the handles, the kettlebell up. You'll find this very wobbly and unstable. Terrible hypertrophy movement, but it's going to help you get more stable in an overhead press position, which is going to help you express your strength more. And it's one of those things where it's like, is it a huge difference maker? No. But I think if you want to tell yourself or other people that you put your best foot forward for growing your overhead press, you have to do that stability work. And then at the end of every day, especially in the hypertrophy phase and the strength phase, I've also got us doing rotator cuff work. You would have seen this done for physio and that sort of thing. Very important, don't do it down here. I think that's way less specific for overhead press. Do it in the overhead press position, or overhead position, I should say. So you're going to be doing your internal rotations and your external rotations. This is just going to really build your strength in the back of that shoulder, in the rotator cuff muscles, to keep you strong and stable. But enough talking in theory. Shall we have a look at what it looks like in an overhead press program? As always, what I like to say is programs are like recipes. So if you like this, then you can just make it as maybe you see a nice recipe, you can just make it verbatim and it'll probably be pretty good. But also, especially because this is an overhead press specialization program, if you want to figure out how to synthesize this into your other training, maybe you can take this program, copy paste it, and then figure out how it will work with your training. Basically, I've just got 3 days here, because that's what I was talking about. I think you should overhead press 3 days. So we've just got 3 overhead press specialization days. Now, one thing to note is you could pull these apart a little bit. Like you could overhead press 3 times a week and pull out the accessories to other days if you want to. But this is what the days look like. So notice at the bottom here, we have 3 tabs of the Google Sheet. Those are the 3 phases. The last phase, the peaking phase, is just a very basic example because I think peaking is super individual. Some people, for example, if they try and peak and pull out their accessories, it actually makes them weaker because they're so used to having the accessories in their program. And other people need to pull out the accessories because else they're too tired. So it's just an example of what a peaking phase might look like. It's just one with no accessories, just super basic. But you might know better how you peak. So that's something that you can work with. So that's just an example. But these, the strength phase and hypertrophy phase, I think are actually relatively universal, relatively. So let's have a look at day 1 of the hypertrophy phase. We start with overhead press. This is our heavy overhead press day. So we have 4 sets of 4 to 6. So because it's hypertrophy training, I think having a rep range is helpful. It just helps you progress a bit more. It's a tight rep range because I don't want you going too high in reps because this is strength. It's a tight rep range, but just a little bit of space for you to move. So heavy overhead press, 4 sets of 4 to 6. Nothing fancy, just normal overhead pressing here. Then we go to overhead press hold. So this is a really big part of building overhead stability, is just spending time in an overhead position. Now you'll notice every day has an overhead hold. You're just going to use the same weight you used for your overhead press, so you won't have to change weights or anything. And it's just going to be basically, obviously, because you're going to be using a heavier weight for lower reps, it's a shorter hold time. So basically over the course of a week, our hold time gets higher because we're going to be using lighter weight. So it's just 3 sets of a 10, 20-second hold. So you're just going to go to the very top and you're just going to hold. And this is going to build your stability all down the whole body. Shoulders, of course, but also at the core and at the legs, which are actually going to help you stay strong and stable for your overhead press. So 3 sets of 10 to 20 seconds. And I gave the 10 to 20 seconds because some people will find that they're very unstable and very wobbly and they might fail even before 10 seconds, and that's totally fine. But if you're a bit stronger, then you'll get a bit longer. Then we go seated dumbbell press. So because this is the hypertrophy phase, we want something to give us a little bit more front delt volume to just make sure we're growing. And we're doing it seated because we don't want too much axial fatigue, and seated dumbbell press is really good. It's going to help us build stability in the shoulders as well because the dumbbells are inherently a tiny bit more unstable. So we're just doing that for 3 sets of 10 to 15, just straight hypertrophy work here. And I've included that on the heavy day because it's the day we've got lower volume. Then we have face pulls. So these are going to be on every single day. They're just so good for building strength and stability in the shoulder, especially the back of a shoulder, the rear delts. Those are going to be a staple of any overhead press program, I think. And then we've got what I was talking to you about before, the 90-degree external and internal rotations. These you're just going to do on a cable machine, by the way. You're just going to hold a cable and do that. In fact, actually at the bottom of this sheet here, I've just included a YouTube video from like 2009 of a dude doing it, just so you know what it looks like. Then we've got day 2, which is our pause day. So this is a pause at the top overhead press for 3 seconds. So you're going to just do same rep range as day 1, but you're going to do a lighter weight because now you have to pause at the top. So it's going to be press to the top, 1, 2, 3, and back down. And I want you to get used to breathing at the top here as well. Then we got the same thing, overhead press hold, this time a bit longer, 25 to 35 seconds, because you're going to have used a lighter weight. Then we have full range of motion side raises, so like a Lou raise all the way up. This is a great way of training with side delt, but also giving you more practice and time in the overhead position, because you're spending time up there now, and you're maybe training a little bit of the stability structure up there. Then we have face pulls again, like I said, every single day. We've just got a slightly lower rep range on face pulls today, a little bit heavier. And then we have javelin press, which we talked about. That's that neutral grip barbell press, just building stability. And a tiny bit more front delt volume, but it's not the greatest front delt volume because it's unstable, so we're not using it for any hypertrophy purposes, just for stability. Then same thing, we've got our external and internal rotations. Then we move to day 3, which is our volume day. So this we're going 8 to 10 on the overhead press. And one of the benefits of a volume day is not only are you going to get hypertrophy from volume, of course, and this would be like any bodybuilder would look at that and say that's going to grow me. But the other thing is that it makes you spend just more time in overhead position. You get more fatigued, more activation of the abs and the legs that are keeping you in place. Then we go same thing, overhead press hold, and this is a long hold. Because you're doing a lighter weight, because you're doing like sets of 10, I'm going to get you to hold this for 30 to 35 seconds. That's going to be a while, and you're going to be freaking tired afterwards. But you're going to be so stable and so used to an overhead position. Then we just have standard dumbbell side raises, just standard bodybuilding side raises, just build the side delts a little bit, nothing weird there. Then we've got face pulls, 3 sets of 18 to 22, so just a bit of a random rep range, but it's just a little bit higher. Just to make sure that we've got different rep ranges for each of our face pulls, so we're not doing the same thing each day. Then we got that kettlebell overhead press we talked about, just building stability. Also lots of wrist strength, which is very useful for overhead press. Of course, you should be holding low in the hand, so it's not too much wrist involved, but you've got to be stable. You can't have your wrist doing this while you overhead press. So that's where that kettlebell overhead press will come in. And then once again, our external and internal rotations. So at the bottom here, I've outlined that the hypertrophy phase can last 4 to 12 weeks. I think anything less than 4 weeks, you're unlikely to get any robust hypertrophy. And I think you can go all the way out to 12 because, in fact, honestly, you could go more than 12 if you wanted. I think 12 is just, a lot of people would be kind of tired of it by then. But what I'm trying to say is this could really be based on you. If you feel like you already have quite big shoulders, maybe you've been hypertrophy training, maybe you're quite a jacked bodybuilder and you just want to get into being strong, then maybe you just do this for 4 weeks. Whereas if you were maybe new to the gym or new to overhead pressing, then spending a lot of time in this phase will help you build the muscle needed. So this is just really personal, really up to you. Do you have big shoulders already? Maybe don't spend that long here. Do you feel you have small shoulders? Then spend a while here. But for everyone, it's worth spending some time here. Just for even, say you got huge front delts, spending some time building the rear delts, building the stability, building the rotating cuff will help you be strong in overhead press and safe as well. Cool. Now we go into our strength phase, which I put here as 2 to 4 weeks. Once again, could be a bit longer. Could be, I wouldn't go shorter. I think 2 weeks is kind of what you need to at least to start adjusting to the lower reps. But yeah, it could be a bit longer if you want it as well. If you feel that each week you're still getting stronger and still specializing more, especially say you've been bodybuilding for ages and you really need a while to figure out what like low reps feels like. So day 1 of our strength phase, we're doing the exact same thing, same order, heavy pause and volume, but now our reps are way lower. So on our day 1, we have first a set of 1. So that's a single, just to really teach us the skill of lifting close to our maximal weight on an overhead press. What does that feel like? Of course, I want this to kind of be at an RP, 8 or something. So it's not going to be it's not a 1 rep max, but it's a single, a tough single. And then we go to 3 sets of 3. Once again, just heavy overhead pressing, just getting practiced. Once again, we're going into some overhead press holds, but you'll notice our hold times are way shorter because we're doing heavier weights. So I can't ask you to hold, something you could overhead press for free for 30 seconds, you would die. So just 10 seconds, but same logic, getting more stable. Then we go to face pulls. Face pulls basically all the same. In fact, all the accessory work is basically the exact same. I've just pulled out a set on everything. So it's just going to give us so our total volume per week is actually quite a lot lower because we've lost a set on every single exercise. And what that's going to do is allow us to bring down our fatigue a little bit so we can practice, be more and more into our heavy pressing. So like I said, all the accessories are the same. So let's just go have a look at the other overhead press days. So pause at the top. I've just brought your reps down to 3 each set. Once again, just getting used to being stable and strong with a very heavy weight, close to maximum because it's a set of 3. And then finally, our volume day is just sets of 5. So volume, is not a lot, but it should hopefully be enough to kind of keep your muscle on your body, basically. This is like practice, but also keeping the muscles you build. And then finally, we have our example peaking phase. You can see this is super duper basic. I just gave an example here what it might look like. So first things first, I've reversed the order. So our volume day is at the start, because you've got to remember that we're going to be trying our 1 rep max kind of a week after, maybe on Monday of a week after, or after a deload, right? So we want our heavy work to be as close to the end as possible, so it's most recent, most practice. So we just start with 4 sets of 3. Just basic, we've got no accessories this week, by the way. Like I say, that's a choice. Some people would keep their accessories, but I've just pulled them all out, so you've got, your fatigue is washing away now. So you can just purely focus on what we're actually here for, which is overhead pressing. So 4 sets of 3 on day 1. Day 2, we've got pause at the top for 4 sets of 1. So now we're really just getting used to being strong and stable with a pause with heavy weight. And then on our last day, we've just got 4 sets of 1. Last day of the entire program, 4 sets of 1. Just get real strong, real used to pressing heavy weight above your head. But all of this, I wanted that kind of RPE 7. In fact, maybe I'll even just make a note here on the program just so you know. I want this to be chill. So I don't want these to be 1 rep maxes. I don't want you to do 4 1 rep maxes in a row. And yeah, then you would take a deload. Whatever a deload means to you. It could be longer, could be shorter. I'd recommend like a week of very easy training maybe. Or maybe a bit shorter than a week for a lot of people, maybe 4 days. Whatever deload works for you, whatever you found. Take some sort of deload, eat lots, let the stress wash away, chill out for a little bit, and then come in and hit a heavy 1 rep max. And you should find that it's grown a lot because now you're going to have built muscle in the shoulders. You're going to have built so much stability. The back of the shoulder especially is going to be so strong. You're going to be so stable up here. You're going to have no wobble. You're just going to be super stable. And then, of course, you would have spent a good few weeks building up the skill of lifting heavy overhead presses, which is a skill, and it's different to other lifts. And then hopefully you'll have a big new 1 rep max to celebrate. So yeah, thanks for watching. And remember that this program is just an example. I think the most important thing to pull out of this video is what are you doing on your overhead press programming for what are you doing for frequency, what are you doing for intensity, what are you doing for volume, and what are you doing for stability. And that stability one I think is especially important because it doesn't apply that much in other lifts. You don't do stability training for a deadlift. Like what? It's the most stable lift ever, just stand. It's just are you strong enough? But the overhead press, I think that stability is actually a big deal. One thing I should mention as well is there is a 5th variable, which is mobility. If you find you can't get your shoulders back here, you may need to do some mobility work. And I might make a video on what that would look like later on. So I wouldn't attempt this program until you can get your shoulders, your biceps to your ears, basically, until you can get into a standard overhead press position. But yeah, so if you want to get a big overhead press, obviously you can use this program if you want, or just think to yourself, how often am I overhead pressing? How hard am I overhead pressing? How many sets am I doing? And then what am I doing to make sure my shoulders are stable and healthy as well? And if you can kind of make sure you're on top of those 4 things, then you'll get a big overhead press. I think try and really take to heart what I said about more, like 3 or more times per week. I really think that overhead press benefits massively from frequency, and you're just not going to get a huge overhead press from overhead pressing once a week, or not as huge as it could be. But yeah, hopefully that helped, that chat about, about what's important with overhead pressing. And then of course, yeah, have a look at the program, see if it interests you, see if it's maybe something you would want to tweak or change, or just run with it verbatim. But yeah, hopefully that helped, and I'll see you later.